On July 21st, 1861, the Union force of 35,000 men, under General Irwin McDowell's command, met the Confederate forces of 22,000 men, under General Beauregard. Both sides suffered from inexperienced soldiers and especially officers. McDowell's attack plan was to send two-thirds of his troops in a frontal attack, while the remaining cut off the possibility of Confederate retreat to Richmond. The Battle of Bull Run included mistakes on both sides that could have turned the tides of the battle. The Union mistake occurred when Union generals lacked coordination and blocked their own troops with 12,000 men. Alongside McDowell's delayed orders, these mistakes by David Hunter and Samuel Heintzelman on the Union side allowed the Confederates to adapt to the Union plan. The Confederates' lack of communication resulted in D.R. Jones's advancements toward the Union force alone, without support from Richard Ewell or Theophilus Holmes' troops. Despite a convincing victory, the Confederates made another mistake due to General Beauregard and the other Confederate officers' inability to agree on a counterattack after being reinforced. Northern casualties included 2,896 men, 460 of which were killed, 1,124 wounded, and 1,312 missing. This is significantly larger than the Southern casualties of 1,982 men, in which 387 were killed, 1,582 wounded, and only 13 missing. Due to this loss, the Union realized the war would not be swiftly won as they had expected. This had a positive impact on future Union battles because of preparations made shortly after this battle. For the South, a surge of confidence filled the Southerners that added on to existing feeling of economic superiority that was generated by the Northern devastation in the Panic of 1857. Southern enlistments also dropped dramatically during this time period due to the confidence gained from the victory. The Peninsula Campaign was a military effort led by Union General George B. McClellan from March of 1862 to July of 1862. Only a few months after the beginning of the Civil War, the North still held the belief that the war should be short, despite the loss at the First Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861. McClellan led his army of 100,000 men through coastal waterways. On their way to Richmond, McClellan captured Yorktown after a month of fighting. Soon after, when the army was near Richmond, Lincoln gave orders to the general to instead attack Stonewall Jackson's army. Then, Jeb Stuart's Confederate cavalry surrounded the Union force, which led to Robert E. Lee successfully launching counterattacks from the knowledge gained from the cavalry. These attacks were known as the 7 Days Battle that ended in the Peninsula Campaign in defeat. This series of confrontations caused the death of around 20,000 Confederate soldiers and 10,000 Union soldiers. For his loss in the campaign, Lincoln temporarily removed McClellan as commander. Despite this, the overall benefit of the Peninsula Campaign was granted to the Union. Since they had lost, the Union gained the full realization that the war would not be short. This allowed them to prepare better and anticipate the reality of the war more than the South had. Another critical benefit to the Union was that since they had lost the battle, the war would continually last, gradually turning the Union effort in the Civil War to become an issue of ending slavery. If the Peninsula Campaign had been successful, however, the Confederacy would have fallen, reuniting the states, but slavery would have still persisted for a long time. This loss would also have the Union adapt to a new method of fighting, or total war, which would be shown through the Sherman's March and help them win the war. The South, on the other hand, overall was negatively affected, despite their victory in the campaign. This victory, accompanied by their win in Bull Run, contributed in further inflating the Southern's confidence in their chances in the war. They underestimated the North and confidently trusted that the aid of Britain and France would come. Because of this, when the South began losing battles in war, such as Vicksburg, Southerners would be incredibly discouraged, demoralized, and often desert. The Battle of Chancellorsville was a critical victory for the Confederates, but it came at a great cost. General Robert E. Lee had 60,000 Confederate soldiers in the hills defending the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. the Union Army of 130,000 soldiers under the command of General Joseph Hooker launched an attack on the Confederate Army on April 30th, 1863, with the hope that they could force the Confederates to retreat, closing the gap to Richmond. Hooker led a large portion of his army to flank the Confederates, but Lee did not retreat as Hooker had anticipated. Lee split his army in two and attacked the rest of the Union forces at Chancellorsville. The other army, under Stonewall Jackson, counterattacked Hooker's army from the side. Through quick maneuvering, Lee was able to drive off the much larger Union army, which finally retreated on May 7, 1863. Lee's army had suffered 13,000 casualties, while they inflicted on the Union 17,000. While they won the army, they lost a significant percentage of their army, and one of the best generals in Lee's right hand, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, was killed by friendly fire. They were, however, able to prevent the Union forces from advancing into Richmond, otherwise the war would have likely come to a much quicker end. The Battle of Antietam was a critical battle in the Civil War for the Union. After his success in Virginia, Confederate General Robert E. Lee marched his troops north into the Union in Maryland. Lee believed that if he could launch a successful invasion of the Union, Britain and France might recognize them as a nation and send aid to help their cause. On December 17, 1862, Lee's Confederate troops met the Union force under the command of General George B. McClellan outside of the Maryland town of Sharpsburg. Lee's forces numbered around 38,000, while General McClellan had 87,000 troops, vastly outnumbering the Confederates. But this did not make the battle easy. Prior to the battle, 2 Union soldiers had found the battle plans of General Lee, but McClellan did not use them much to his advantage. McClellan remained cautious and never sent his entire force into battle, and when Lee began to retreat in the evening of the next day, he did not pursue the Confederates, an action which made President Lincoln remove him as commander of the Army of the Potomac and replace him with General Joseph Hooker, who was also present at the Battle of Antietam. Lee's hope that Britain and France would join the war did not come to fruition after his failed attempt at invading Maryland. President Lincoln also used this Union victory to announce the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves within the Confederacy.
During the first 3 days of July 1863, General Robert E. Lee devised a plan to create negotiation room in favor of the South's secession. Lee's original plan was to attack military outposts within Maryland and Pennsylvania, while the main Confederate force kept the main Union army busy in Washington, D.C. In doing so, he hoped to crush Northern morale, as it was easy for the North to go along with the war, as it wasn't happening on their soil. When Lee mobilized his troops to move up north, he ran into a skirmish at Gettysburg between 2 cavalry divisions. When word hits Lee, he sends his entire army to go take out this massive supposed Union force. 60,000 Confederate soldiers rally to attack Gettysburg, only to find that the 3,000 Union defenders there are dug in, and initially the battle goes well for the Union until the overwhelming numbers of the Confederacy forced them to retreat. The Union soldiers fell back to a fishhook-shaped ridge called Cemetery Hill. This said ridge provided an amazing defensive position for the Union defenders, and would have to do until reinforcements could arrive from Washington, D.C. Lee noticed the Union's lacking numbers and realized that the reinforcements were slowly trickling in. This gave him the idea that they were open for an all-out attack. This all-out attack would come to be known as Pickett's Charge. A Confederate officer by the name of George Pickett would lead the charge across 1 mile of open farmland, all the while being hit with artillery shells, rifle fire, and not to mention the lack of cover. While the charge had become legendary in Southern society, in terms of strategy, the charge was quite futile and was a waste of Southern manpower. As a result, Lee's attack lost momentum and the South had to pull out of the North. This would be the last time that the South would try and attack the North. The battle was not so much a turning point for the North, but more of a confirmation that Northern victory was at hand. Militarily, the South was defeated. It was just a matter of defeating the South politically now and reuniting the states